Alrighty. So, welcome back, everyone. We're here with another episode of A Student's Perspective. My name is Paige Bechtel, and today I'm here with Zehra Ahmed. She's the founder and curator of Women in Windows, and we have a pretty big handful of background to go through for her, starting from architectural design all the way up into where she is now. And I'm excited to learn about the different dynamic kind of possibilities that her career has offered her and how it can kind of relate to some of us in our own career path. So, Zehra, would you like to quickly introduce yourself and your current position?
Sure. So I'm currently working very full time with Women in Windows, which is a platform I founded that shares the perspective of women on culture, society, and identity. And alongside that, I am also a co-founder of a design studio called Major Visual with my partner. And we describe it as a world building studio. So that is sort of a more, real world, professional, commercial endeavor. And then my passion really is, or I guess what I call my art or my creative outlet is researching histories and narratives around food, especially from South Asia, which is where I grew up. I grew up in Pakistan. And then testing recipes that I find interesting and, mixing things up on the weekend and, creating, narratives around those ideas.
It's amazing. So I guess I want to start off, which is perfect that you started to reference that, talking about just different backgrounds and cultures and what yours has kind of brought to the table within your career, the way that you discuss narrative and so strongly talking about, say, the intersection between culture and even getting into food and design and where that all comes into play. But like you just said, South Asia?
Yeah, so I grew up in Pakistan, in Karachi, which to many people's surprise is one of the largest cities in the world with a population of 25 million people. So yeah, I grew up in a very big urban city in Pakistan.
Mm-hmm. And then you shifted all the way to RISD for college. What was that environment change like?
Yeah, it's interesting. When I moved there, so I went to college, and this is going to age me in my freshman year was 2004. And it was shortly after 9/11, a couple of years after 9/11. So it's interesting. I mean, I sort of expected, I had been to New York once before, so moving to the United States wasn't kind of, as many people would think, a culture shock. We grew up watching American films. I think it was probably more of a culture shock to Americans talking to me and not being shocked at all. But I mean, Rhode Island, it was actually like the perfect place to move to. It was like a really great mix of it was a small town. I mean, the wildest aspect of it, which I sort of adopted pretty quickly, I suppose, was, everyone was very interesting and unique. Like, no one wore jeans and a t-shirt. Like, the fashion was wild. It was the beginning of, as I call it, hipsters coming into existence. There was a lot of neon spandex. And lots of poppy hairstyles, which by the end of my freshman year, I also had. So I think I adapted pretty well. And also I was very open to it. Like, it was an exciting new chapter in my life. And I sort of just embraced it completely.
Mm-hmm. So I'm excited to talk about some of the specificities, I think, within your career and all the kind of different outlets that you're able to offer. And like I already said, between food and design, but then the continuation through women and some of the unique passions I think you hold that you're able to represent through your design. How do you think a lot of that was influenced through college, through a more structured career? Or did you realize some of those kind of niches or some of the passions that you held then? And did they come through in your designs?
Yeah, so it's interesting to think about it like that, because I think about it often too. I mean, I studied, I did a full 5-year architecture program, and all through architecture, I would dream of being in every other major as well, because you just felt so fun. The textiles department was incredible. And the cool thing is that we got to do a foundation year, which everyone does, which is just like drawing, painting, sculpture, art history. So it allows you to sort of, work through your ideas and whatever you're sort of exploring. Because, at 18 or 19, we do make career choices, and architecture is very specific. But you don't truly ever know. And architecture is one of those things you sort of have to have like real passion for it. Otherwise, you're not going to survive the program. It's very, very intense. And at the time, I think also just because of coming from Pakistan, it was like, I've chosen to do this and I'm going to get through it no matter what, even though I had moments of complete despair while I was in the program. And like, I definitely had moments where I was like, oh my God, this is like the worst decision of my life. But what it does, and I think what has carried through up until now, I mean, I've obviously like had a very circuitous sort of trajectory so far. It's definitely not a very linear track. But the one thing that I think what architecture or an architectural education gives you is the ability to think very analytically and very critically. But at the same time, super conceptually, which is, ties back into the idea of narratives, how you evolve a story, how you develop a concept. And then, and because in architecture, you're never quite good enough, you're always striving to do better.
There's always more to be done.
Exactly. And I think, and the work ethic that you develop at that point in your life, you sort of carry with you throughout. And I mean, it's incredible that they give you that. I mean, I think the process that one goes through to get there is very painful, and I'm not sure that's necessary in life. But it has its pros and its cons. You don't live a traditional college life. You can't party as much as everyone else does, and you're sleep deprived most of the time. But it makes you stronger. It makes you wanting to do better, and it makes you critical and also self-aware, which I think is actually quite lacking in society these days. Because you're constantly analyzing what you're doing. With every project, with every critique, with every review. And I think that is something that very, very few educational programs can give you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so that same kind of intellect and kind of the conceptual thinking that architecture schooling gives you, I mean, I could defend that till no end because I do believe it's changed so much as just my better half of thinking about not only my future career, but just the way that I live my life personally. And giving back to people in general. But like you said, iterating and constantly wanting to improve. Also, it's like one thing always affects the next. But so that same structure that you gathered from school, because you did work a few years as an architectural designer out of college.
So I worked for 6 years at an architecture firm called Cohen Pedersen Fox. And yeah, it's interesting. I mean, I went to such a conceptual and, critical art thinking school that when I sort of, it was kind of just, I told my mother I wanted to live in New York, and she said, well, you have to get a job. And it was, it was 2009. It was the peak of the recession. Nobody was hiring at all. And obviously the jobs that I wanted were with companies or designers that were on the more sort of creative and experimental end of the spectrum, but there was no, I mean, I remember I had a spreadsheet at the time and I applied to like maybe 100 places and I spoke to so many people. It took me 6 months to find a job, but Cohen Pedersen Fox hired me, and it was luckily someone had put me in touch with one of their senior designers who was, and she's still there, Hana Kassam. She's a Lebanese designer, and she hired me, which was like a miracle because it was the only job offer I got that would allow me to live in New York. I had a lot of offers that were going to pay me $500 a month, and I was like, I don't think I can even breathe with that much money. But so that was my first job, and was there for 6 years, and so I sort of entered this very corporate, commercial architecture world, which at the time I was like, yeah, of course I know how to design a building. But when you actually start doing that, you're like, wow, this is wonderful. And it's so much more than just design at that point, right? It's team building, it's management, it's, living up to expectations, not just of the people you're working with, but like clients. And these clients at the time were mostly Chinese or Middle Eastern, because America didn't have very many projects going on. So yeah, I did that for 6 years. And in the beginning, obviously, like any new graduate, I was super enthusiastic. I was there all night, all day, like working away. I mean, the one thing I had going for me is I was pretty good at Photoshop. My CAD skills and my 3D skills were, they were fine, but they weren't amazing. I learned sort of all of it through that job. And like learning how to put together a drawing package, even though like now in what I do, I don't need that. It gives you like skills that you can carry on, forever, really.
So was there a breaking point, or not a breaking point necessarily, but where was kind of the lift-off moment that you left that structured kind of career?
Yeah, so I had been trying to leave 3 years prior to I actually left. So there was like a hiccup in, I guess, my New York life where I was on a visa and I had to get it renewed. And so I went to our London office for 2 weeks to renew it, but it didn't get renewed for a year. So I couldn't come back to New York for a whole year.
Nice.
Which is crazy to think of now that I just like randomly got stuck in London for a year. But I was lucky at the same time that our office had, an office, like we have an office there. So I could work out of there. And I mean, and at that point I was like, I'm done. I'm like over this. But I was super obsessed with the hospitality world and the hospitality industry, hotels specific. I had done a few hotel projects while I was there. And all I wanted to do was work with like the Standard or what do you call it, the Ace Hotel. And I think at that point I realized that what I really loved doing was like creating experiences and creating and bringing different creative practices together.
Yeah.
And at the time, hotels were sort of the embodiment of that, or the closest thing I could get to that would allow me to do that. Because for a hotel, you're thinking about food, you're thinking about music, you're thinking about, how does this space work when all these different people come in? Like, what are the rooms going to look like? What's the future of this? And obviously, Ian Schrager has a huge role to play in how hotels have evolved. And I became obsessed with him. And there was a hotel right behind our office. I would go to it every day. So I and that sort of made me realize that that's the world I want to be in. And so I started applying to all these hotel jobs. And luckily I got some interviews, but because I was stuck in London, I couldn't actually come to any of those jobs.
Yeah.
So anyway, then eventually I got my visa, I came back to New York, and I was there for another year or two before I moved out. And through that process, I mean, I was obviously working and I was grateful to have a job, but I was also looking at how I can sort of move on and get out. And I wasn't able to find this sort of dream hotel job in design that I was searching for. And then my friends, so luckily the Haas brothers, Simon and I went to college together. And I was talking to him, and he was like, "Oh, our studio manager just left. Do you want to move to LA?" And even though it was like something that was very different from what I was doing, and I actually had no clue what I would do, even if I did go and work for them, I just took it as sort of an out from architecture. And I knew that I had convinced myself that it was the right thing, but it was definitely like a very big risk because I was leaving a profession that I had built my career in for like a pretty decent amount of time, and entering a world that I didn't know much about, and I wasn't even sure what I was going to do. But I was like, I can manage people and I can manage some kind of a business. So yes, I'm going to do this because I don't want to continue to build towers in my life.
So manager was your position kind of when you were working at the hospitals?
So yeah, I was mostly sort of managing the studio and the studio's relationship with the gallery that represented them. And so I sort of just started taking on different roles that no one else was doing. So it wasn't it wasn't actually a creative position at all. I think the most creative was I organized the dinner or I helped set up the gallery show. But I was really just sort of like organizing people, projects, and talking to the galleries and seeing how, and I think the insight I got while I was there was really how the art world functioned.
Yeah.
And how the art and design world at sort of, what we call art with a capital A, big galleries, how does an artist come into existence? What factors contribute to that? And that was sort of the knowledge I was gaining in my sort of 2 years over there.
And that kind of makes me think of, just the fact of installations and kind of dealing with the smaller scale of design in general. Mm-hmm. And that makes me want to jump into just all about your personal portfolio. And so you started doing work on your own, and that was kind of where that intersection of food, experience, and narrative was able to finally come together?
Yeah, I think so. So I've always been obsessed with food, parties, entertaining. I grew up in a culture that's also obsessed with food. It's sort of kind of the main form of entertainment from where, growing up.
Together.
And so, yeah, I've always done it. I would always, even in New York, I just did it for myself. Like I would host parties and things that I always like sort of had a narrative or like a theme, as one might say. And so, yeah, as far as my own work, it's relatively new. I would say I've been doing it more full time in the last year and a half. It took me a long time to get there because in my head I was like, I don't know if this is a real thing, and also how does one actually sustain themselves doing it, right? Like how do you make money? Because we all need to do that as well, and that's sort of the tricky part, and being able to do what you're super passionate about and what you love, but also being able to, find ways to generate income. And so I was actually consulting with a hotel group on design as a freelancer while I started thinking, and sort of women in windows and the food happened simultaneously almost. So my own work, I look at stories. I look at stories. I look at narratives around food histories, specifically from like Pakistan, India. I would say, what you call the global South or South Asia these days. And also just talking to my mother and like other family members about what their sort of cultural experiences were as kids around food, because food is tied into like a lot of stories around our holidays and religion and almost like every single thing. I did my very first installation at this event called Disco Stan, which is run by a friend of mine, Archia, and she was gracious and generous enough to be like, yeah, totally. I was like, I have this idea, I want to do this. And that's sort of where the first installation came into existence. And I called it A Courtesan's Kitchen, which at the time, when I told people, they were like, wow, are you allowed to do that? And I was like, what do you mean? And they were like, well, you're taking visual and design ideas from a culture or from people that don't necessarily see the best end of that. And I said, well, the story I'm trying to actually communicate is in a specific part of India and Lucknow, these women were sort of at the forefront of what we call feminism today. Yeah. And they were independent, strong, and were doing, living their life on their own terms. In a culture that didn't always support it. But they were also the gatekeepers of culture. Like, they were women who were like into poetry and like, knew how to, like, there was a special way of speaking and dance and literature. And I feel like that, those groups of women have existed in a lot of cultures in Asia in general. And so it was a way for me to communicate that story through visuals, through food. And yeah, that was my very first installation.
And how did that start to extend in finding, I guess, other clients basically, and not specific kind of entities, but I feel like these experiences or the narratives that you're able to create through the installations create really specific experiences. And not only do you have such a visual graphic identity, but finding them seems so unique. So without either going out to find clientele, how does that kind of work?
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely hard. And I would say since I'm relatively new to it, I don't think I have the perfect answer. But my other sort of jobs came from word of mouth. I would just like talk to people and I would be like, I'm doing this. And the thing is, it's always been a little difficult for me to explain to people what exactly I'm doing because I've done so many different things. And we live in a world where, like, if you don't do one thing, you're not always taken seriously. So that's always a tricky thing too. So because I did that first event and I had really great photos, I could be like, look, I do this now, and if you know anyone that needs sort of food set up as an installation with some sort of, with a story, let me know. And one of my neighbors, he was working at Champion, the clothing store at the time, and he's like, oh, we're having a store opening. We're doing a Pac-Man collaboration, and we need food. And I was like, okay. And so I sort of just like worked with them and developed the narrative and like figured out what it was going to look like. It had to be in their store. We had parameters. And I think that really was like the first project where like design and food and like true collaboration came in.
Mm-hmm. That was the exact project that I was thinking of. It seemed so specific and unique, but it came together in such a powerful way.
Yeah, I was super excited by it, and I didn't actually have much time to work on it. I had maybe like 2 weeks because it was super last minute, but I was like, I have to do it because, you take everything that you can get, especially if your vision aligns with what the company wants. And so, yeah, that turned out super well, and it was such a great experience too because it was my first like very commercial store. And like, kind of fashion. And I had no clue what the crowd was going to be like, how many people. And it turned out really fantastic. And I mean, who doesn't like hot dogs?
Yeah, I know. That's true.
But it was super fun because like with hot dogs, I could then also bring in, we did, obviously the concept around it was America and sort of the concept around fast food, and the visuals were that, with the water dispensers that I filled with like blood orange lemonade. And I actually didn't make those drinks myself. I had, there's a really great organization here called Lunch on Me, which feeds the homeless in Skid Row. And they have a small bodega run by the woman who, also runs the organization called Larea's Bodega. And they make these, fresh pressed juices and lemonades. So I actually brought them. I had it in my budget to like bring them on to provide all the drinks, which was nice to be able to include someone that is, working locally. And also, I mean, anytime I have an opportunity to bring in any woman-based organization or store that is impacting others, I will try to pull them in.
Yeah, absolutely. So I still touch on, because we still have a few minutes anyway, but major and women in windows. I definitely want to touch on both of those before we run out of time.
Yeah, so women in windows, do you want me to talk about that now?
Yeah, go for it.
Okay. So women in windows came into existence, February of 2019. I started thinking about it, I would say November, December of 2018 as an idea that Freeze Los Angeles was gonna have its first year here. It was very close to where I was living, and I was like, oh wow, that's interesting. Like, the big art fair is coming to LA. And I always liked being, and at this point, I'd obviously moved on from the Haas Brothers, and I was doing this hotel job and sort of thinking about food, but I was also thinking about what else, and what do I want to do? And it was sort of on a whim that I was going to a lot of talks around women of color, and I was sort of seeing a lot of video art, which I thought was quite powerful. And I just I found myself thinking about how do we showcase different cultures to different and wider audiences. And I mean, it was sort of like, I was like, oh, I kind of just want to put a film in a window. It started pretty simple, and I had no clue I was going to call it Women in Windows at the time. And I spoke to a friend of mine who did some video art, and then she connected me to other artists. And it happened quite organically and quickly. And then, we just, at the time, I mean, I was super lucky that I had all those hotel consulting jobs. So I had some savings, which I just used to produce the show.
Right.
And the artist was super generous by letting me use their videos. I mean, I wasn't able to pay them. I just had enough to kind of install the show and have like an opening or two events around it. And one of the events was like a preview, which actually introduced food into it, and obviously we can talk about that more if you want at some point. And now I have a partner full time, Ashley, who was one of the hosts for the films last year.
Oh.
And she really loved the project and was like, hey, would you mind? I would love to work with you. And it turned out really well. She's actually stuck in Australia right now, but she's been helping me sort of get to the second iteration of it.
Mm-hmm.
It's been hard because we were hoping to raise money for it this year. And obviously with COVID and everything, it's been really, really tough. Mm-hmm. But we're planning our second exhibit for October. And luckily for us, it's always been socially distanced because it's outdoors, it's in windows, you access sound through QR codes. We're going to host it on Chungking Road in Chinatown in LA, which is exactly where we hosted it last year. And we have a few, we had about 10 or 11 storefronts last year, and this year we'll probably have like 15 to 17, which is really exciting because the community there is super supportive. I mean, I sort of went out there and just knocked on everyone's door last year to be like, hey, do you mind if we use your window to host a TV? Yeah. And so they've all agreed to do it this year too, which is fantastic. And hopefully we'll have some cool partners on board this year as well, which, I can't announce yet, but we'll probably in a few weeks announce the public exhibit. So that's super, super exciting. And I'm very full time on that.
And what was it like curating a group of women like that to work with you for the first exhibit? And was that just through networking and finding more artists?
Yeah, it was sort of like I would, the first friend I spoke to put me in touch with two artists, and then I spoke to them and explained to them what I was trying to communicate. And then they sent me some video options they had, and then I was like, hey, do you know anyone else you really like? And then I sort of also just started researching on my own, and I emailed people I didn't know. Mm-hmm. I just said, I'm doing this. I mean, I showed 6 artists last year. I probably emailed, 20, 30. Some respond, some don't. Some have work that, align with what I'm trying to do, and some don't. And so you sort of just have to keep going. Yeah. And I think architecture also teaches you that. It's rigor and persistence. You cannot give up.
Absolutely. We have also, I should mention, we appreciate you being on the call today too, because it is also a struggle to find people that even want to have these conversations with us at some points in time. So we appreciate you getting your message out there.
Yeah, no, I'm happy to. I mean, I think for me, also what's really important about, when Stephen told me about what he's trying to do, I think it's really important to remember that it's never easy to change your career or your profession or indulge your passion. I mean, it just isn't. But the thing is, you can do it, and it's never going to feel right, because you're never going to get recognized for it, right? Like, I've done a lot of things, but because I haven't stuck to one thing, I'm not recognized yet for the things I do, and you have to be okay with that.
Yeah.
I mean, had I been in architecture, I would have been there like 12, 13 years now, and I would have either been like a principal at a corporate company or not, or started my own thing. But yeah, you kind of just have to keep going and like just not give up.
And find the passion in it as well.
Yeah, and I think, I mean, even though I do a lot of different things, and I very recently sort of come to this realization, is the underlying thing for me is culture.
Yeah.
Is how do I address and talk about culture through different media.
Mm-hmm.
And whether it's food, whether it's film, and whether it's women, culture is the basis of that. And I do truly believe that if we share enough of our cultures and our perspectives, we will bridge like the differences and the gaps that society is currently facing. Mm-hmm. And because ultimately, like, we all really just want the same thing. I mean, we all want to live like a happy, good, fun life.
Yeah.
And really just like building mutual respect. And unless someone knows more about us, how are they going to know what we're like or where we come from? So the more we do that, the better. And whatever medium one chooses to do that in is, their choice.
Yeah, absolutely. The more we're able to share and connect, and I guess start to understand one another as well, is the best way to bridge that gap. And I love that we can do that through design.
Yeah, and I mean, design is like really the basis of life, right? If you think about it. And I always tell everyone, when a lot of people say, oh, should we go to architecture school? And my initial reaction is like, no way, never go to architecture school. It's horrible. But every time I find myself contemplating my life in architecture school or architecture and design in general, I'm very grateful for it as well, because it equips you, not with like, like not just with technical skills, like, hey, I know how to use the software, but it equips you mentally with so much that I don't think many educational programs or careers can really do that in the way architecture or design thinking does.
Absolutely, and work ethic, and the way that you even already said to never give up in some of those aspects. But I don't think we would follow the beaten path of following your gut and different sort of passions if we didn't have that structure, or at least in your own case, definitely.
Yeah, I mean, it also just you kind of know that architecture makes you reconcile to the fact that, oh, I don't know if I'll ever be good enough, but I'll just keep doing whatever I think is good enough.
You'll be good at what you want to, absolutely.
Exactly. So, and I think that's, really another thing is like, you just have to, you can't wait for outside validation. You have to be content with what you're doing, and that's all that matters.
Love what you do. That's also the motto. Yeah. But I do want to talk about major visual, I guess, just a little bit. How did you, or who did you found that with, and when?
So we're actually, he's my husband. He is also an architect, and major visual, I mean, he is very good at 3D visualization and, creating very, very hyper-realistic imagery. And so, and I love generally like art direction. I'm not a very software or tech savvy human being. I always used to try and run away from that, even when I did architecture. I was like, can I just do a hand drawing? But we try and take on projects that require, again, it's like storytelling for currently the interior and design worlds. But, with COVID, obviously more and more people are moving towards animation, video, and he definitely does the heavy lifting on that front. And he will do most of the production, and I will do, project management, talk like network, try to bring, talk to people who are doing things that I think we would enjoy doing. This was mostly him, but he just did a video for the Future Perfect with Billy Vixie, which is furniture design duo out of Mexico City. So it's like the first digitally rendered exhibition online.
Mm-hmm.
And so, we do a lot of work. And then we have other clients that are just more commercial, and he works outside of Major Visual as well. So Major Visual is sort of what allows women in windows to happen. Okay. And obviously, with food, there are no events happening right now. So I just, obviously I can't do that as a commercial endeavor. And I just did a gallery opening here in LA that was doing a fundraiser. So I did a small installation for that. But yeah, Major Visual, let's just say Major Visual sustains with my passions.
Yeah. And you still ended up with someone in architecture as well, which is funny.
Sorry?
You ended up marrying someone in architecture as well.
Yeah, it's crazy because for most of till it happened, I said I would never do that. I was like, I am never going to be with another architect. Like, that's just crazy. You don't have two architects in the same home. They're not. But I think, you know what? Never say never. But also, I was super lucky that we're very different, but we both share a passion for design. And that's kind of exciting because we share different passions within design. But, when we have crazy ideas, the other person gets it. It's not like you're nuts for thinking that and don't do it. Like, honestly, like if I told someone who wasn't, as design forward thinking about my food or women in windows, like I just want to put screens up and talk about the perspective of women, they'd be like, there, go, like, find something else. It's pretty far-fetched, technically. And also, there's like no way to like make money with that. You're kind of just investing your own time and money into it. But I so strongly believe in the mission, and I'm lucky that I have someone in my life who also does that. So yeah, it worked out.
Yeah, it makes the conversations nice.
Yeah, for sure.
Not related. Yeah. Oh my gosh, I just lost my train of thought really quick there. Oh no. Let me think. I wanted to end on one point. We are running out of time, but I guess sorry. So what I wanted to lastly say was something I guess regarding COVID, but not necessarily your full opinion, because I know that could carry on forever, but like you already kind of started to say with the visual renderings and how that's affecting the world right now, I find that really relevant within our field. A lot of the times we need to see some of these textiles and furniture pieces all digitally, and being able to talk to whether it be sales reps or whoever it may be, and try to understand what the product is like through your computer. I think that's where those visual renderings come into such handy when they actually are able to offer that quality that you can't get when you're actually experiencing it. And so I know a lot of your installations and things like that, that is definitely going to take an alteration as we think about it moving forward. What are your kind of plan and action for some of these changes, and how do you see things moving forward?
Yeah, so in terms of Major Visual, I actually think visualization is the way forward, especially for design and designers. And as much as I understand that, for a lot of people, like touching a fabric or touching the wood is really, really critical, I think fewer people, or at least the younger generations, can now understand images better. Mm-hmm. And the one advantage that we have, especially with Douglas, is that his renderings, even though like some might say, oh, they lack creativity, are so highly realistic that you can experience, you can imagine yourself in that space.
Oh yeah.
Or you can imagine yourself with that pillow. Mm-hmm. We have some clients that are textile designers and that are lighting designers, and like also the really good thing about it is, at least the way we think about it is, it's a great way to share your image, share your images, your narratives. It allows us to be a little bit more creative and dreamy about the interiors we choose to use. And for bigger companies, I think one of the biggest things is it's, less waste, less production,
right?
Less, like you don't even, and I don't know if this is a good thing or bad thing, but a designer doesn't even have to have multiple products produced before we create the images.
Yeah.
They obviously have to know how it's going to get built or, made before they decide to sell it.
Mm-hmm.
But they don't have to spend that initial investment producing tons of samples to have a photo shoot. And then the cost of doing a photo shoot and then the waste around a photo shoot. And, with a lot of photographers and spaces, there's always like licensing agreements. And so we try to keep things pretty simple. We create spaces that people want. And, there's a balance between doing projects that are more commercial and that are more kind of fun and dreamy. So like the animation we just did for the Future Perfect, which is, as I said, mostly Douglas, was kind of an outlet into that creative world. And we hope that we can do more projects like that. And we did it really fast. To create a film or a video like that in 3 weeks is just like not feasible, especially when people are all over the world. So I think visualization, CGI, computer generated imaging, all of it is a way forward in the design industry, and it allows people to test out ideas and concepts really quickly.
Mm-hmm. Changes to them, of course.
Totally. And even something as small as like, I don't like that blue fabric, make it pink. We can do that really fast.
Okay, so I guess now to wrap up on all of this conversation, there's going to be a lot of points and places where we can find you on either website or social media, and I know there's a lot to cover, but would you mind telling some of the viewers where we can find you on either social media or...
Yeah. So I think the best place to find me is just on Instagram, and it's at Zehra, so Zehra twice, but also I do Zehra Ahmed with one A in the middle. And if you go to that, there's also a link to Women in Windows, to the Women in Windows handle, and that's WOMXNINWINDOWS. So it would be really cool, for people to check out Women in Windows. We've been producing small video profiles on various femme artists and other activists that we've been posting, and there's a lot to learn from all these women out there, so go check it out.
And then Major Visual lastly?
And then Major Visual is just at Major Visual on Instagram, and all of these Instagram accounts also link to websites for my personal work, which is food and installation, and then Women in Windows, which is now an ongoing platform, and then Major.Visual, which is what we call a world building studio.
So there's a lot of places that we can use your help, and there's a lot of places where we can find you and utilize your resources. So
and if anyone ever has, for you too, and if any students who ever want to chat about how we have gotten through the depressing points of life regarding our career, I'm happy to talk to them because it can be really hard.
Yeah, we get that. And that's also, we continue to say this, the point of a student's perspective is to make people realize that there's other options. And sometimes it does feel, I think some people give up maybe 4 years or 3 years into the schooling, thinking maybe this isn't the fit for me anymore. But it doesn't mean that your degree won't offer you a million other opportunities beyond that.
Totally. And the one thing I always like to share is, even if you do get into a traditional architecture job, don't stay in it for 6 years, because it's actually really difficult to convince people after those 6 years that you can do other things.
So
it is important to realize sooner, how you can keep moving and keep involving yourself in other projects that you're interested in, whether it's in your traditional job or not. But stay involved in the things you enjoy. Otherwise, there's no proof of that, of that concept, really, that you can do other things. Because unless people see it, they're not going to believe you. And that really is the hardest part about moving between professions and careers.
Mm-hmm. Thank you so much. Thank you for the advice. And I'll just give our short closing. But thank you for watching another episode of Student's Perspective, everyone.